Good day, everyone. We are so glad that you are here. My name is Krista Mosier, and I am with Train PD at TCall. And so we are doing another survey to find out what suggestions you have for future Teacher Tuesday topics. Or you can email me and I will respond. But if you have any suggestions, please let us know by the link or the email of what you would like to see for future Teacher Tuesday topics. All right. So now I would like to introduce our presenters today. We have Elena Madrid and Felicia Clute. So I'm going to do Elena's biography and then Felicia's biography very quickly. Elena Madrid has served in the field of education for over 17 years with combined experience as an assistant director for student leadership and campus life at El Paso Community College. As a recruiter for El Paso Community College, a literacy coordinator for Ysleta del Sur Pueblo in El Paso, Texas, and currently as a program specialist with the Department of Adult Education and Literacy at the Texas Workforce Commission in Austin, Texas. Having a passion for leadership and personal development, she contributed to the creation and facilitation of the first annual El Paso Community College Student Leadership Conference and co-created the Blend College Stepping into Leadership program for AEL students. In her spare time, she regularly takes the opportunity to speak to groups on the topics of empowerment, education, and success strategies. She further gives back to the community as a board member for the nonprofit Awaken Inner Fire, which shares a mediation practice to promote wellness and life balance. Ms. Madrid holds a BA in journalism from New Mexico State University and an MA in leadership studies from the University of Texas at El Paso. Her experience as a first-generation college student drives her to make technology, information, and resources more accessible to others so that they can increase their opportunity for success. All right. And then we have Felicia Clute, who is a Region 2 program coordinator. She obtained her BA in English with a minor in Latin from the University of New Mexico. She briefly taught English in secondary education prior to dedicating her time to raising her children, as well as managing corporate clients and doing bookkeeping for the family-owned construction business. Felicia joined Crossroads Adult Education in the fall of 2019 as a data entry clerk and was quickly promoted into the performance accountability specialist role in 2020, and now serves as the program coordinator. She is driven to help grow the adult education program using data analytics, to identify areas of improvement and applying targeted and measurable changes. The practices which she implements are developed to be sustainable to ensure the long-term success of Crossroads. Felicia rides in the coastal bend where she enjoys camping, reading, scrapbooking, and spending time with her family and 3 dogs. Awesome. All right, welcome, ladies. We are glad that you are with us.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I can tell you what, as I saw the numbers going up and who's participating today, I was getting more and more anxiety. So we were talking about people getting nervous when they present, and I don't know if any of you feel this way, but I've given many presentations, but I do still feel nervous when I first start presenting, but it's very exciting to see people that I worked with in the field showing up in this opportunity today to learn about MSGs, the MSG report, and more specifically when it comes to helping the instructors with that specific information. So thank you very much for joining us today. I just wanted to say hi briefly on the video, but I'm gonna go ahead and turn that off and I will go and bring up the PowerPoint. So thank you very much. So today we're gonna be covering the MSG report, and the subtitle is There Can Be a Method to the Madness. So what I always try to do in my work with people in the field is take information, but make it applicable. So a lot of times we, especially today, just in every day, not just with work, we're inundated with a lot of information, and we're bombarded many times with advertisements, with emails, with phone calls. So we're always getting all this stuff coming at us. So we've had to become very, very good at trying to decipher what is useful, what is not, but also making it applicable. So I know that a lot of times we enjoy attending workshops, we enjoy continuing to be educated, but it doesn't do us a lot of good if we aren't doing something with that information. So when I try to work with programs or share out information, I try to do it in a way where you're going to be able to take that information and do something with that. And that's definitely what we want the intention to be here today. I'm going to be going over kind of the technical stuff when it comes to the state and the requirements for MSGs, and how to find the MSG report in Teams, what would be useful to instructors. But I've also invited Felicia Clute from Region 2 to join me today. When I first met her, she was she was a data entry clerk, and she's moved up in her organization because of the skills and her work ethic that she has. When Krista was sharing out her information, I don't know if you had noticed, but she does have a background in bookkeeping, in helping to run a business. And I feel that all of those skills that she brought with her to this position has helped her to move up, because she's really good at analyzing data. She's really good at asking questions when it comes to the data, and also doing something with that information. So I'm very, very thankful that she decided to join me today. And this is her first time presenting in this way. So please support her. Please encourage her and let her know that she's doing awesome in sharing with you, because I really think that she has a good process in place that I think would be useful for other organizations and instructors. All right, so let's talk about what's going to be covered today. Let me see if okay. So we're first going to talk about what is an MSG. So I think there's going to be a lot of people on the presentation today who may not know what an MSG may be, because maybe they're new to your organization, or maybe they just weren't exposed to this information. So I want to take it from a basic level and then build out from that. Then we're going to talk about the different types of options for an MSG. So those of you who have been here from the very beginning know that when we first started out, the only option to make a gain was on the domain of significance. But today we have several different options, and I'll go into detail of what those are and how they can be achieved. Next, we will cover what is in the MSG report that is useful to an instructor. So again, when I'm sharing out information, I want to be specific to the audience and in a way that they can take the information and not hoard it, not feel like, wow, I'm empowered now because I have this new understanding, but to take it and share it with other people in the field, take it, create a process, do something different in your classroom that's going to help the students to be more successful. So again, we're getting close to over 140 people on this webinar today, but I think I was told there's something like 1,800 instructors in the field of AEL serving throughout Texas. So this is a very small percentage of who's doing the work out there. So I hope that you all take this information, you go out, share it with a staff, a coworker, create a process, and do something useful with it. The other thing we're going to talk about is where to find the MSG report. So for those of you who are comfortable with Teams, this is probably going to be an easy thing for you. For those of you who have yet to get access, I would suggest that you request access, at least a reader access level for Teams, so that you can go in and you can start pulling these reports and you can start looking at the information that will be presented today. And then finally, towards the end of our presentation, we will have Felicia present out on the process that she's created for Region 2 in using the MSG report, and most specifically helping in the area of post-test gains. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so before we get started, we're going to have a little poll that Krista is going to go ahead and put up for us, and it's to get a better understanding of who's participating today. So if you could please select your main staff position or role. So we have a couple of different things on there. If your position isn't there, just select other. This just helps me have a better gauge of the audience, and if I have to kind of tweak how I'm presenting the information. So it looks like the instructor's in the lead. Go instructors, go. Go instructors, go. But we have coordinators, directors, no test proctors. Well, that's probably like a secondary thing. I'm sure some instructors are doing test proctoring. We have some data entry clerks, career navigators, great. Some other. I'm interested to hear what the others might be. For those of you guys who put other, if you could put that in the chat. Who is an other? Okay, so other, again, if you have marked other in this poll, if you could please put that in the chat, that will give us a better understanding of who's participating today. So in the chat, I see office assistant, aides, I see Teams data specialists, HSC instructor, a lot of aides, grant administrators. Hi, Jill. Program aide. Okay, great, great. We still see instructors in the lead. Program secretary. Wow, whoever got their program secretary to participate, thank you very much. We need everybody we can get to understand this information. Site facilitator, Teams coordinator. Okay, very good. So we have a pretty well-rounded group of individuals participating today. What we have here is 10% director, or 8% actually, 10 directors, 21 coordinators, 39 instructors, 1 test proctor, 18 data entry clerks, 10 career navigators, and 31 other staff that have main duties that are participating today. So thank you very much. Okay, let's go to the next poll, Krista.
Okay. The second question was there. Do you have access to and use Teams? And let me go ahead and end polling, and that way we can launch the results. And you did get your 130 people.
Awesome. If I scroll down, I see, do you have access to Teams? 108 or 91% said yes, 118, and then 9% no. That may be the secretary that I saw pop up in the chat. But this is really important. So not only is it important that you have access to Teams, but you're actually using it, right? So some people may say, oh yeah, I do have a password, but I never get in there. So it's really, really important that not only do you have your password, you can log in, you're using it regularly, but you're using it for a reason, right? You're not just going in there for the sake of, oh, I have this access, so, you know, that yay for me kind of thing. Okay, so that's the poll. So thank you very much for participating. Okay, so let's talk about what we want to try to accomplish today. So the objectives are the things that we would like for you to walk away with. Again, using this information for a reason. So the first thing is be able to describe to others how to locate and download the MSG report. This should be the most simplest and basic thing you should be able to do after you're done participating today. The second thing is identify where to find information in the MSG report that will help with participant performance. So it will become more clear after you get the information exactly what those different types of MSGs are and how can you help the students accomplish these things. 3, compare how not knowing about the MSG report and now knowing how to use the MSG report can benefit you in helping your students obtain your goals. So a little bit of self-reflection here, stepping back, and maybe you learned something new today that's actually going to help you to do your job better. So kind of, you know, looking at those things. What did I not know before that I do now know that is helpful to me? The fourth thing, and probably, you know, what is the next level of kind of like expectation of an objective is design or propose a process which uses the MSG report to increase numbers of participants tested as well as increase post-testing gains. So this is more related to kind of what Felicia will be sharing out towards the end of the presentation today. Maybe you like what you see in the system that she presents to you, and you can just take that information and adopt it for yourselves for your program if you don't already have something in place. So let's back up and let's talk about the POP, because the presentation that I'm doing today is actually part of a sequence of presentations that we're doing for Teacher Tuesday. The first presentation was given by Veronica Moore last Teacher Tuesday. If you missed out on that information, she covered everything related to the POP report, periods of participation. So it's a little bit of a foundation of what we're going to be talking about today. So let's kind of go and test your knowledge. Let's look at this quiz that I put together and see how well you do. So I'm going to ask you to put your answers in the chat once you think you know what it is. So when does a period of participation start? Is it A, when a student completes an application form and is made eligible for services by testing? B, when a student starts attending classes? C, when a student has accumulated 13 proxy hours? Or D, when a student has accumulated 12 direct hours and the hours are entered into teams? What do you think the answer is? At A, B, C, or D? Lots of D's, lots of D's.
It was cute, Elena, at the very beginning before you'd gotten all the answers. There's some guesses and some good answers. And then, you know, when D popped up, that's what we're getting for the most part.
I see someone answer A, when a student completes an application form and is made eligible for services by testing. But for the most part, I see a bunch of D's coming in. So let's look at what the answer should be. So the answer is D, but they need an hour. They need an hour. Okay, so a period of participation will not start or will not be established for a person until they get 12 direct hours. So sometimes we're giving them different hours, right? Sometimes they're doing training hours because they come back and they start in IT, or maybe they're doing proxy hours because there's a lot of this remote learning going on, right? So we think that, oh, I just need to get 12 proxy hours and now they're a participant. Well, no, they're never ever going to count as a participant and a period of participation be started for them until they get 12 direct hours and until they're entered in teams. So this is really important for instructors because you're probably not entering the information into teams and you have nothing to do with that. You just know that you're providing instruction and you just assume that this person is now a participant because they've been in your program for 3 weeks. Well, in the data, if it hasn't gone to your data clerk, it has not been entered into teams, it does not come out on the reports, they will never be counted as a participant, no matter how much time they spend in your classroom, unless that information is entered into teams. And it has to be direct hours. So again, if they're accumulating a bunch of proxy hours, they're in distance learning, they only have 1 direct hour, they are still not being counted as a participant. They need to get the proxy hours, but before the end of the program year, they need to get the 12 direct hours and it needs to be entered into teams. Okay, so let's go to the next POP question. What are some things that can be found in the POP report? So this question will be easier for those who participated in the first presentation by Veronica Moore or who have been actively using the POP report. So what are some things that can be found in the POP report? A, when a student has exited. B, how many hours a student has accumulated. D, when a student becomes a participant. Or D, all of the above. So if you could put your answers in the chat, please. We're seeing D, 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 D. For some of you who don't know, you probably do what I do, you know, kind of elimination, what might sound the best. But yes, it looks like D is a winner here. So let's look at what the answer is. So all of the above. So in the POP report, you will find all of this information. But remember, today we're talking about the MSG report, not the POP report. This is just a refresher of what you should know. Now, why I'm asking you this question is, one, to see what you know about their POP report, but you also have to know how these two reports are different. And you have to understand, because some people are like, well, why do we have to have 2 reports? Well, because they offer very different information. And the most important thing I think that really differentiates the MSG from the POP report is a student is not going to show up on your MSG report unless they become a participant. So until they got the 12 direct hours, they are never showing up on that MSG report. So for instructors, if you're pulling information for your class with the MSG report, and you're like, I know I have 20 people in my class, but only 5 are showing up on the MSG report, that's a red flag there telling you that all the people that are showing up in your class, probably only half of them are being counted as participants because they still have not gotten 12 direct hours. So very important to know what the differences are. All right, so fun facts, just refreshing your memory on these things. Period of participation, a participant will remain a participant indefinitely unless they are exited from your program. So what does exited mean? It doesn't mean they left your classroom and they just disappeared, so they're no longer part of the program. Exiting, when it comes to performance and to state measures, happens only when the student chose to not have 90 days of more of activity in teams. So basically they got 90 days, nothing has been entered into teams for them in terms of hours or any type of activity. So teams will identify that participant as being exited. So that means once they're exited, if they ever do come back to your program, they are basically having to start the process over again to become a participant for service, including getting the 12 direct hours. The next thing is individuals will not be counted towards total enrollment or any other target unless they become a participant. So as I mentioned earlier, get all the proxy hours under the sun, but if you're only getting, 11 direct hours, they are never being counted as a participant. The third thing, a POP can be extended over multiple program years. So again, once you're a participant, you remain a participant unless you're exited from teams, which means if a person started in 1985 and they didn't miss more than 90 days of service, their POP continues over those multiple program years. If an individual reaches 12 hours and doesn't exit, they simply have to earn 1 contact hour recorded in teams in the new program year, and they are counted as a participant. So I think this is what the person that answered A in the first question was thinking, and this is true. Once they become a participant, again, that period of participation extends over multiple program years. And the way that it extends is if they're already a participant, the new program year starts, they get 1 direct hour. They automatically get counted towards performance. So it's not that they have to get 12 new hours in the program year, they only have to get 1 because they've already established their period of participation. Next, an individual can have multiple POPs in 1 program year. So this happens, for instructors in the situation, you have someone coming in and out of your program, in and out of your class. Maybe they start off strong at the beginning of the program year, they go 3 months uninterrupted in service, and you're like, yes, this person's finally going to stick with it. And then they disappear for 3 months, right? They disappear for 90 days or 91 days. Then they show up again. It's the same program year. You now have multiple periods of participation for that person in the same program year. So that's an example. The next thing is each participant has to get a measurable skills gain every program year and achieve outcome measures after each period of participation. So what does this mean? MSG's measurable skills gains, you have each person, every person that becomes a participant, they get the 12 direct hours. The program is now responsible for showing some kind of measurable skills gain with them. And we have very specific things to show that. And that's what we're going to explain today.
Liz made a comment about your fun facts.
Oh, yeah, they are fun, aren't they? No, just kidding. Maybe for someone who's doing this a long time, you find certain things fun, but I think for most people they are. Okay, so I just want to talk about what was available to you prior to what we're going to talk about MSGs. If you want to get more information on POPs, because you really need to understand periods of participation before you get into these other outcomes or measures. Veronica Moore, again, she did a presentation last month. It's going to be available in the portal pretty soon. So this is the latest and greatest. This is what the latest presentation or information that we have provided on periods of participation. So as soon as it becomes available, I would suggest that you check it out. It should be recorded and available shortly.
So a new POP starts only after 90 days without service?
a new POP will have to be reestablished. So if the student gets exited after they've gone 90 days or more without service, you're going to have to reestablish period of participation. And the way you do that is you have to get 12 direct hours again for that student. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So when did this information even become available? So for some of you who have been doing this for a while, you might be like, I've never heard of this MSG or period of participation. We've been talking about this at least on record since 2018. Carrie Chupo, who was previously with our office, she's the first one who started having conversations about this, putting information out to the field. She did a webinar that's available in the PD portal if you want to ever visit that and get some information. But really, we started this back in 2017, but this is really the first time she put something recorded out to kind of help people in the field to understand this type of stuff. So check that out if you do not know much about POPs. Okay, so let's talk about your MSG knowledge. Of the following, what are options for MSGs? And you can put your answer in the chat, please. 1, or A, a post-test. B, enrollment into post-secondary. C, passing a content area of the GD and or HiSET. Or D, none of the above. What do you think the answer is here? You put your response in the chat. So far I got 7. A, B, A, B, A. Lots of post-testing, because that's probably what you are most familiar with. A and B, B, C, D. Wait, okay, no Ds. All right. Okay, so far I didn't get any Ds. And this was actually a trick question. So it's going to be none of the above, and I'll explain to you why. You're like, what? Post-testing is an option. Come on, Elena, you're just messing with us. No. Post-testing with a gain. How many people post-test and do not get a gain? We know this happens all the time. Actually, that's probably what happens more than people post-testing and getting a gain, right? Yes, tricky. I am tricky, yes. So it has to be a gain or it's not an MSG, okay? Now, enrollment into post-secondary, it has to happen after they have exited. You cannot get an MSG for them if they're still enrolled and are a participant in your services, and then they enroll into post-secondary. So they're enrolled in AEL and they enroll into post-secondary. That is not an MSG. They have to exit from your services, right? So let's give it an example. April 1st was the last time they showed up in your class. Didn't tell you they were going to start classes tomorrow with the college or next week. But then they disappeared on you. You don't know where this person went, but later on they come back and say, hey, miss, I'm doing so great at the college now. And you're like, okay, well, I didn't know where you went, but thanks. So in that situation, they stopped coming to services April 1st. They started services the next week at a college. So what will happen in Teams doesn't know what happened with the student. They just know the data is just being recorded. And if nothing's being recorded for that individual, it's going to go the 90 days and it's going to establish that exit date after the 90 days have lapsed, have gone by. But if you guys as a program are doing the right thing, and as soon as you found out that person is participating in college, you'd want to say, hey, is there any way we could get some proof that you're enrolled now, maybe a class schedule? I'm really excited to see what you're learning. You get a record of that class schedule you entered into Teams. So what happens is when Teams finally establishes that exit date, you've already have that information of their enrollment a week after they stop services with you. You now have an MSG. So that's where it gets a little bit complicated. And you all have to know the difference. You can't be testing and thinking you're making a gain or an MSG. They actually have to make progress. So none of the above in this case. Yes, and I wanted to trick you and I did. Sorry. Okay, so measurable skills case. Let's get into the meat of this conversation. I know I went a little bit long on this, but I want to see where you're at with this understanding. So basic level MSG's measurable skills gains are a measure of the documented progress. Remember, documented. That means it's in T's. Academic, technical, occupational, other, that a participant, someone that has 12 direct hours, makes toward obtaining basic education, a credential, or reaching employment-related performance indicators. So remember here, when you're looking at this, it's not just basic education. It could also be credential attainment or getting employed. So these are all the different measures that we're looking at. And the MSGs will are tied to those things. So that's why you have a lot more options than you did with just the post-testing. So let's talk about some options here. There are two broad categories of MSG or MSGs, and this is where it gets a little bit complicated, even sometimes for your coordinators and administrators. The first category is going to measure basic education activities. Those are your types 1A, 1B, and 2, one category. Then you have a second category that are designed primarily to measure workforce training and IETs, type 3, 4, and 5. These are only going to apply to the population of students that are participating in these services, either IET or IETL civics. So that's basic understanding of this information, but important to know. So here again is additional information on the two categories. Again, you have basic education, you have workforce training. Basic education, the high school equivalency achievement, the post-testing with a gain, the enrollment to post-secondary, and then you have the other types of MSGs for those that are participating in IET, IETL civics. Now, how these two are achieved in terms of when you achieve them are different. When it comes to the basic education ones, the type 1, 1A, 1B, type 2, they have to be done within the program year. So every program year that a participant is participating, you need to get an MSG for that person, at least one. People that are participating in training, the type of MSG that you have to achieve for them, if they are in these services, has to be done within their program of study. Now that's different from a program year, because we know the program year runs from July 1st to June 30th. A program study could actually go over multiple program years, right? So maybe it's one that starts in the summer at the end of program year 1 and extends into program year 2. So as long as they get that type of MSG within that program of study, then you've done what you needed to do for that student. But here's one thing that you do need to remember. Whoever's getting a workforce training IET also has to get a basic education IET. So they almost have to get two, or they do need to get two. They don't necessarily have to get them both in the same program year, but they will have to get both. They'll have to get both. Your average student that is not participating in an IET will only need one of the basic education MSG options. So this is a little visual that'll help you kind of differentiate those things a little bit better. It's also provided to you as a handout so that you can carry it around with you. You can put it in your file where you look at your information that's helpful to you. It's easily accessible. So again, here's showing your basic education MSGs on the left side, which are circled in red. You have a number of different options, and we're focused on those first. So you have type 1A, type 1B, and type 2. You have achievement of high school equivalency, type 2, and then you have the pre-post test with a gain, which isn't shown here, but with a gain, and then an enrollment into post-secondary education in the program year after they exit from services, AEL services. So these right here, everybody that's a participant should get at least one of these while they are in service with you. These others, go ahead.
Ellen, I'm sorry, there is a question is, what if they obtain their HSC before the program of study ends?
So they got an MSG, and then the question would be, what is your plan for them? What goals are in place for them after choosing their HSC? Now, some people might be looking to get an HSC because they just need to keep their jobs. I've heard that a couple of times. But other people are looking to continue their training and education, so then you can enroll them into an IET, right? So they have the MSG. You won't necessarily have to post test them, but the recommendation is that you do. And the reason for this is, as a student in your class, you should be doing the service to them and helping them see that they're making progress in the learning that they're getting with you. Now, I don't know what each classroom is doing individually and helping them to do that. I think people have established their own ways of kind of gauging whether they're doing better or not. But for terms of the grant, what we have is the post testing. So they want to see after 40, 60 hours, after the time they've spent with you, they've made progress, right? So you would want to post test them again. Does that answer your question? So once they got the HSE, you should still be working on helping them either get some training, get gainful employment or better employment, preparing to enroll into college. Those are other services that we offer under this grant. Okay, so I hope that helped. So again, these other on the right side, type 3, 4, or 5, these are for people in IETs or IET EL Civics. Now here's another handout that I provided, and it breaks down the types of MSGs again and puts them into categories. So you see the basic education MSGs at the top, you see the workforce training integrated education and training MSGs at the bottom, but it gives you a little bit more details in terms of the documentation that you need to record for these things. So again, everything that's happening in your program, if you want to get credit for it, if you want to show that they got a high school equivalency, that they, enrolled into post-secondary, it needs to show up in teams. So this is why it's important for instructors to understand this part, because I know a lot of times you're really engaged in working with your students and you're maybe not that informed on these performance measures, but this is how the grant is tracking that the students are actually doing better in the services that are being provided. So that's where the communication, I think, falls short sometimes, because yes, teacher, you're doing a great job. You know that your students are advancing, but the state needs to know that your students are advancing. We can't be in your class knowing that Robert or Mary is now, on to post-secondary and you help them achieve that. We need documentation of that. That's the only way the communication really works at the state level for us. So where do measurable skills gain fall into all of these outcomes? Well, there's a lot of outcomes and measures related to the grant and the funding that's attached to this. Now, your directors, maybe your coordinators, your administrators will know all of this, or they should know all of this, because TWC is talking about it all the time in almost every meeting. So I'm sure it's like they probably can regurgitate it without even thinking about it. But for instructors, just know that the measurable skills gains are part of a lot of other outcomes and measures that we look at for the grant. And this is kind of where it falls in here. And you also have a handout for that. Any questions so far?
Okay, there is a question. Does passing an HSE exam and RLA count as TABE reading and language levels? Does passing an HSC exam and RLA count as TABE reading and language levels?
No. Thank you, Karen. It does not. Okay, so fun facts about MSGs. Just reminding why it just doesn't, it's not established right now. Unfortunately, that's not how it's written in legislation in terms of, outcomes and measures. If it ever does change, we will definitely let you know. It's something that I think Anson had been asking for in the past, but it has not been established that way. So each participant has to get a measurable skills gain every program year and achieve outcome measures after each period of participation. We went over that. I just want to make sure that it sticks. Measurable skills gain show progress towards an outcome. At least this is how the state measures it. So again, instructors, you're in the classroom. You may have your own way of measuring performance, but this is how the state and the grant measures performance. More opportunities for measurable skills gains were made available to AEL programs at the TWC AEL Summer Business Institute 2017. So you saw the options that were available to you. Those previously were not available to you. The only way that you could make a measurable skills gain or a gain was in one very narrow opportunity in testing, and that was on the domain of significance. So even though you tested them maybe in 3 different areas, unless they made improvement on that domain of significance, you didn't meet the measure. Now you have multiple opportunities, so it's actually a good thing. MSG recorded and or matched can be found in the MSG report. So just a reminder, on the MSG report, that's what we're focused on. We're not focused on periods of participation. We're not focused on accumulated hours. We're focused on, are they getting any of these? And where can we find them on the report? So what happens if a participant exits and doesn't get an MSG? You've lost an opportunity, but you're still on the hook. So anytime they become a participant, and that's why it's really important that you don't let them exit, especially if you see a pattern with people coming in and out of your services, and you can see that in the data. You can actually see their different periods of participation, how long they stayed away. You want to break that habit, because every time they come back, they're establishing a new period of participation, and you are on the hook for another MSG for those individuals. So it's really important that you understand what their goals are, you get them to their goals as quickly as possible, and they move on to something else, as opposed to coming in and out of your services continuously. What can you find in the MSG report? So these are some things that might be important to the instructor to know. Just a reminder, if you're looking at this report, if they haven't yet become a participant, they're not going to show up on this report. When did a participant receive a pretest? So when was their educational functioning level established? What is the participant's educational functioning level? So this is important to know, where do you start with them? And for many programs, what class do they get put into? Is a participant eligible for post-testing? So you're going to also see how many hours they've accumulated between tests. So once they reach those 40 or 60 hours, they're pretty much eligible to be post-tested. And you need to stay on top of that, because if they're not getting post-tested and the hours continue to accumulate at the state level, it looks like these people aren't checking to see progress, right? They're just accumulating hours for them. The other thing is, what were the pre and post-test instruments for a participant? Some programs may start off with a TABE, and they should continue with the TABE, but let's say they transfer to another program and that program only does CASAs. Now you're stuck with 2 different tests. They can only make progress on a test that they haven't established pre-test with. So if they come to you and they were originally, testing with TABE, you're going to have to establish a baseline for them with CASAs in order for you to post-test with CASAs. When a participant post-tested and did they make a gain? So again, this is important. It goes back to the quiz. You can post-test all day, but if they don't actually make progress, then you didn't get an MSG. What type of gain has a participant achieved? So you'll get to see on one report, did they make a gain with the pre-post testing? Did they complete an HSC? Did they enroll into post-secondary? All that stuff should be entered into Teams. If it's entered into Teams, it's going to show up on the report. It makes it easier for you to keep track of progress for your students. What was the latest contact hour class for a participant? And why might this be important to you? So if you're an instructor and you can see a student's profile. So if you see that you were with Denton and then they took off to Dallas, you should be able to see what their classes were, where they last had a class, So if they just disappear on you and all of a sudden you're looking at the report and you happen to pull up their information and you notice, wow, they're in classes in Dallas now, it kind of helps you to at least know that they're still continuing their studies. So let's talk about where to find the MSG. Yes?
There is a question. It's, are there a required number of hours for orientation for the exiters?
For the exiters. So when a person exits and they come back to you, is that what you're talking about?
Yes, Tara says yes.
Okay. So basic requirement for any person coming to AEL, 3 to 12 hours. Most programs are doing 3 hours because that's a minimum. Now, if a person has exited, you have to know that this person has been gone for 90 days. right? So you do need to revisit with them. You do need to check in with them and give them some kind of like, let me bring you back into services and give you some information on this. You should be treating them as a new participant. So the requirement would be a minimum of 3 hours. So you should be reorientating them. That's why you don't want them to exit. Why do you want to make extra work for yourself? And I know sometimes you're like, yeah, well, we can't help it. They just leave and then they come back. Well, maybe we need to revisit the attendance policy and tell them like, like you might have to wait till the new program year starts or some, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of different situations, but you should be treating them as a new person to your program, with the exception of the testing. And I don't really want to get into that right now, but your test is valid for 365 days. If it's valid under the situation right now, you will not have to retest if they come back to you and have exited, as long as that test is valid. So where to find the MSG report? For those of you guys who are familiar with Teams, you go into reports, you go into participants, and it's the last option on what's listed. So the MSG management report. And then you're going to get a screen that looks like this. So I got this from the Teams training. It may look a little different from what shows up for you, especially, because we generally have access to everybody's information. The main things that you're going to see is the funding source here. These are the different funding sources we have available. Each student is tied to a funding source in the class. The other thing is the class. So in my case, I can see the different options. I can choose a class that I want to look at specifically. For the instructors, you may only have the one option of the one class. Unless you're teaching multiple classes, then you may have multiple selection to choose from. And then you choose the report. So at the very bottom, you're going to have option of run report summary, run report extract, and then view report description. And I'm going to go quickly to what those different options are. So with the MSG report summary, it's going to look very basic. It's going to show up this way. You don't have to filter anything or extract. Well, you would have to extract into Excel if you're interested in doing that. But this is the way it's going to show up for you. You're going to have the least amount of information that you can get with an MSG report. If you do the other option, which is the report extract, and I provided this as a handout example for you all so that you can kind of get familiar with it. Again, this is all kind of like testing information. So this is nobody's program unless you have someone that's named Goldie Hawn or Tina, something or other in your class. So with the extract, you get a lot more information. All of those bullet points I mentioned before and things you can find in the MSG report are going to be provided in the extract. So this is really the thing you want to be looking at. Now, the report description is important if you're just getting familiar with the MSG report and you're not sure what each column means. So you see participant ID, name, post-test needed, et cetera, et cetera. The description, that third option at the bottom, is going to go into some detail of what each of those things mean. So if you're just getting familiar with how to use this report, this is something that would be useful to you to go over the information. Now let's get into a conversation of what you find more specifically on this report. So the first two columns, what you notice is sometimes there will be a name of the person's name will be shown multiple times, and their ID also. So a person will be listed every time they have a pre-test recorded. So let's say you give them 3 different tests, their name is going to show up 3 different times because you have to have each of those tests listed individually. The next thing is on the post-test needed, this is where it's important. It gives you, this is your first kind of like indication of do they need an MSG. If it's saying yes, this means that a person has enough hours to be tested and they still have not made an MSG. So they still haven't made any of the options that I provided to you earlier, and they haven't been post-tested, or they have enough hours and they haven't been post-tested. So that's what this column means, post-tested needed. This here, grant recipient, that pre-test may be different from grant recipient that post-test. So here you'll see who was responsible for doing the pre-test. So grant recipient, we have 36 grant recipients total with the AEL grant. And sometimes their students kind of move around to different grant recipients. So you're going to know who first did the intake for them with the pre-test, right? For their period of participation. And that may be different from whoever actually post-tests them. So that might, be some useful and interesting information for you. The other thing here is post-test in the same type of test as the pre-test to make a gain. So I explained earlier that sometimes you may have one program that has been testing in TABE the whole time, and they go to another program and all they do is CASAs. Well, you can't do a post-test with CASAs on a TABE. You're going to have to establish a pre-test with CASAs so then you can post-test. So it's really important when you're intaking a student, you see what their post-testing instrument is and what you have to be prepared for when it comes time to post-testing them. Because the last thing you want to do is bring them in with a TABE, and because the test is still eligible, it hasn't expired, you put them in a class, they go 50 hours, and you're like, oh, they're ready to post-test. And then you realize, oh man, we're using the CASAs. We can't post-test with the CASAs. We're now going to have to we're going to have to pre-test them and then test them with the CASAs, post-test them. So you went 50 hours, and then how many additional hours, I don't know, you're going to need to get the post-testing done with this new testing instrument. Content areas, student must be pre-tested in all content areas unless there is a documented exception for testing. So important, teachers, you may not know this because you may not be part of the testing process, but it is a requirement they get tested in all areas unless an exception has been made. Your directors, administrators should know what the exceptions are. So just when you're looking at the information in MSG, you're kind of looking at it, well, why did this person only get tested in one test and some people get 2 and one person get 3? Because they probably have an exception on file for them. Pre-test EFL. So this EFL, basically you're using this most of the time to figure out what class they should be put in based on their level of learning. But my question is, well, what else are you doing with these test scores? Are you then using them to establish their goals? Is it part of their iCheck plan? How are the instructors continuing to use the test scores in the classrooms, if and at all? Or are they just being told, okay, they have 40 or 60 hours, they're ready to test, they get tested, and then nothing goes beyond that in terms of conversation of performance when it comes to testing?
Elena,
Yes.
there's a couple of comments. One of the comments was, can tape test level EMDA be added next to the EFL column to the MSG report? That would be very helpful.
Okay, so if you could, Krista, could you remind me of that comment? Because that's something, if anything changes in here, it has to go through a very lengthy process. Before these, you can't just change a report, you have to change everything in Teams. So that's a whole different level, but good suggestion.
Okay. And then another person asked if there was a possibility of that copy of that page, the labels that you added.
Sure,
So,
yeah, we can, I can send that to Krista and she can send it out
perfect.
to everybody that participated, not a problem. Okay, so this here, latest post-test. So just talking about, the difference between pre and post-testing, the grant recipients, again, whoever the grant recipient that pre-tested may later on show up as not the one that post-tested. But just to let you know, for those who started off with the student and are concerned about getting credit for those efforts, you will also get credit for that MSG if they do get an MSG and they were post-tested. So not to worry about that, but it's just good information to find out where they showed up. And if you ever need to communicate with that other program for any other reason on that specific student. Okay, everything that's showing up in yellow is going to be the gain. So everything that I mentioned to you before, where to find it on the report, sometimes you're not really sure. When it shows up in yellow on these cheat sheets I kind of created, this is the gain. I try to tell you what the gain was. If anybody shows up here with a date, latest EFL earned date, that means they made a gain when they post-test it, and it's providing you the date when they actually made the gain. So really important to know this column N. If it's blank, they post-tested and did not make a gain. So here you see some people with test dates, others with not. The blanks did not make a gain if they were post-tested. If they were post-tested, okay? Here we talk about test score. So I talked about a test score being invalidated. And teachers, you don't know this all the time, but that's why it's important for you to check this report regularly. Because if you have a person in your class and you see how many days have gone without them having a test, or the test has expired. If they go 365 days, that test will expire. So what does that mean for the teacher? That means if you have a student in your class, you might get put in the position where hours cannot be continued to be entered for that student, or they may not be able to be enrolled in the next class because they don't have an eligible test score. So that's why it might be important for the teacher, because it's going to hinder the process down the road when you try to move them forward in services. So this here, the class, just shows where they last earned their contact hours. So given an example, you have a student with multiple classes, you have multiple teachers, this will just show where they last participated in services. And this is really important when you're trying to track them, especially if they exited, or they're soon to be exited, or they've missed like a month of classes. For your administrators, you want to go to the last class they had and be able to speak with that teacher and get information on, hey, what happened to this person? So in yellow again, we have type 2 MSG, which is achievement of high school equivalency. When they achieve it, it'll show up here. Type 1B, enrollment into post-secondary in the program year after exiting. If the information is provided, it's recorded into Teams, it'll show up here. And then the IET flag, this IET V, W, and X is really for people that are in training. So looking at the type of MSG that they achieve, 3, 4, and 5, that'll show up in W and X. V just shows if they're tied to a training service in Teams.
And Elena, there was a question, and it was, I think, screen back on that is per program year, right? Not POP. And I'm not exactly sure.
So for what's for program year?
Letitia, can you add the context? Latest DFL date.
So this, all of the POP report and the MSG report are all based on period of participation. It's not going to be based on program year. That's what the other reports were tied to, program year. That's why we said you need to stop using those reports, because we changed everything so that it tracks the student based on their period of participation. That's why when you go into a report, so with the MSG report, I think it will automatically pick the program year, but it's going to show whenever they established anything, right? So for example, when they first got tested, it may not be in the program year that you're for the current program year. They might have established their pre-test in the previous program year. It's just whenever they got tested. So that's where you have to understand these things, that these reports are tied to period of participation more than program year. Even when you pull the POP report, you need to put in the specific dates that you're pulling for, because it's not going to pull the program year information specifically. Does that clarify things? Maybe not. If not, get back with me and I'll go through it with you personally, because we need to understand this stuff. So extra TWC guidance. I didn't want to give you guys this stuff in the beginning, because usually the teachers aren't familiar with this stuff, and it's really not the most important stuff for them to get into. I mean, really, the administrators and the directors should be going through this information and explaining it to the instructors in a way that is easier to understand, because some of this stuff can be really complicated and may not make sense if you just take it and think, oh, I'm going to read through this thing. But if you want additional information, there's some MSG webinars that are available. If you get access to this PowerPoint, you can just click on the hyperlinks and it'll take you directly there. And then the AEL letter, where most of this information on MSGs come from, the different types of MSGs, how you can achieve them, the different types of documentation you need to have. Okay, additional PD for MSGs. These are just a couple of slides that mentions webinars you can access in the PD portal that will give you some more basic information. So we have a couple of Manager Mondays, we have Teacher Tuesdays. Thank you, Krista, for providing this information. If you need to get in there and look at what you're talking about. Okay, so time for Region 2. I apologize, Felicia, but thank you. It is time for you now to share
Hi, everyone. I wanted to introduce myself real quick, and y'all can put a face to a name. My name is Felicia, and I started in adult ed as a data clerk and then moved to performance accountability. And I just wanted to show you guys that using these reports is more than just checking your numbers. It is very applicable to what you're doing in your classes. It's applicable to your students and your instruction. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing this information with the processes that we have established here at Region 2. All right. So because I have a background in data, I can really spend hours in spreadsheets and reports and numbers. And I know some of you are probably like, no way, this is not for me, but it really can be. And it's part of creating a quality program. And I eventually saw the need to not keep the data and the reports captive in an office or even on my desk. We have to have regular communication that promotes transparency about our program goals, about our state measures, and how we all fit into the process, because it does take a team. It is not just an administrative job to meet these measures. So at Region 2, we've created a process for our MSG Madness, and we believe this process is sustainable long-term and will deliver more student success in the classroom. We set up a testing team that has quite a few instructors on it, believe it or not. And those instructors were identified by those who maybe only had one classroom and were also savvy in technology. And we asked them to join the testing team. We wanted to utilize existing staff that we already had and cross-train them rather than hiring new. So for step one, we have MSG Monday, and our data staff generates a new MSG classroom-based report. And that's an important distinction because you can use an MSG report that is for the entire grant recipient, but we send out ones that are just for very specific classes. So the data staff runs those reports and sends it to the test proctors. And our test proctors are assigned very specific classes in which they are responsible for testing participants. And because the participants get used to seeing the test proctors in the classrooms, they get, a sense of their anxiety isn't quite as bad because it's someone new. They see them all the time. And we really feel like that will help with their testing anxiety and help them improve on their scores. So then the test proctors share the reports with the teachers. And I don't mean just email it to them. We want a discussion about the report between the proctor and the teacher, and maybe even a supervisor or an instructional lead. And we want you to really break down the information in that discussion that the report shares with us. Identify who is ready for a post-test, see if that person has made a gain, and then move on to the next step. The proctor and the teacher set up a day or a time for the proctor to join the class, test the eligible participants. And we've actually found that it's easier to use a breakout room while the class is in session in Zoom because you have a captive audience. That participant is there. So take the opportunity and get them tested. And we know that adding an additional appointment into our participants' busy lives can be really difficult. So once they're in that classroom, sometimes the teachers will even text a test proctor and say, hey, Julie's in my class tonight. Can you come test? And we will get that done. Having the flexibility available for our students with our staff is crucial in getting them tested and making all of this work. So once the participants test, we get those scores entered into teams and we generate a score report and email them to the teachers. And we really feel like the person that is best to review the scores with the students are the teachers. And they can set aside time outside of their classroom or utilize a breakout room to have that type of discussion with the participant. And participants get really anxious. Once they test, they really want to know what their scores are and see how they're doing. So ideally, we like for that to only take a few days in between the participant testing and actually receiving their scores. And the last, but definitely not the least step, is our data sharing with our career navigator. We feel like this is a really crucial part of it, because at some point you really have to move the participant to the next level. And it's not just about making a gain on a TABE or a CASAS test or a BEST test or whatever system you're using. It's about meeting their end goal. And so we move someone who is tested on a high score, which we would consider a high NRS4, a 5 or a 6, and report that to the career navigator, who reaches out to the participant and begins the process of getting them ready to take their HSE. She walks them through setting up accounts with GED or HiSET and encourages them to start taking those ready tests. And thank you for giving us the vouchers, because we really feel like that is such a great incentive to really gently nudge the participant into getting that GED test done. Sometimes they're so hesitant to really just take the leap and get that test taken. So all in all, this process really should take no more than 2 weeks from start to finish. So the MSG report is full of dates and data, and you're probably asking yourself, what does this have to do with teaching? And how is this relevant to my classroom and students? Data reflects what is happening in the classroom. And if you are not familiar with the data, then you're missing an important tool in developing teaching strategies that may impact the success of your students. Being able to identify participants who are ready to post-test provides you and the participant with an up-to-date information on their educational functioning level. Participants are sometimes really shy and they don't want to speak up and say, this is too easy for me, or this is too hard and I don't understand. Instead, they'll stay in class but not really have effective learning occurring in your classroom. And so by timely testing them, we continuously have an updated EFL, because we have to continue to meet the student at the level they are at, or we're going to miss a very important instruction target. And adult ed is not unlike K-12 education. We use quizzes, we use assessments to determine whether or not educational goals are being met. And being able to identify who is ready for a post-test will help you stay up to date with that information. But wait a minute, let's take a step back. How does data determine effective teaching? Ask yourself, when you look at these reports, are my participants making gains? What is the overall gain percentage for my classroom? Do you even look at that? You can look at a class level MSG report and count exactly how many students have post-tested and how many of those who have post-tested have they made a gain. So for easy math, let's say a class has 25 participants and 20 of those have post-tested, but only 5 have made a gain. Is your instruction effective as a whole? In this scenario, only 20% of your class would have made a gain. And for me, this would indicate that I need to adjust my curriculum, my methodology, delivery of content. Something needs to change to improve the gain levels in my class. But on the flip side, let's say that 60% of the class has made a gain. And you could then dissect that information, because more than the majority have made a gain. So look at the different areas that may be problematic for the students who are not making gains. Is it my instruction? Is it the student? Do they have good attendance? Do they have other obstacles like no technology, no reliable internet? Do they have electricity? Because let's be real, these problems do exist out there. Or it could be that the material or content area is causing confusion for them and they just need some additional help. And maybe using a breakout room to help them just for a very small, short period of time, individualized instruction will help them and help them into that next step, that next success level of making a gain. So my advice to you really is to set a percentage goal. I want 75% of my class, no, 85% of my class to have a gain. And then you got to get it done. But how do you get it done? And one of those ways is to use a scale score chart. So we target instruction for gains. And unlike K-12 state assessments, we are able to get immediate feedback and a detailed report on how our participants performed on an assessment. We would be remiss to not analyze those reports. So when we look at them on our MSG classroom-based report, identify who has not made a gain. And then you use your test publisher's guide comparing scale scores to NRS scores. We use the TABE here. So I provided an example below in the chart of the TABE scale score guidance. So let's use an example. If a participant tested with a score of 452, which is an NRS level 2, they have a ways to go, right, before they can progress to an NRS level 3. And a blanketed general instruction would probably work out really well from them because they need some more rounding out with their education. But what happens if their score was a 485 or a 490? They are 5 points away from being able to make a gain. 5 points. And I routinely see this when I'm examining MSG reports on a whole grant recipient level. I've seen people miss it by 1 point. And those are just a few questions they've gotten wrong. But if we use the scale score chart, we can see exactly where they are at. And we can do this with targeted instruction. We can do this with a little bit of data analysis, find out where they are and where they need to go. And you can help them get there. But how do you get them there? So that's why we want you to grab that test score assessment report and find out what the participants' proficiencies and non-proficiencies are. And those reports give you super detailed information. I really like using them and I love providing them for the teachers because it gives wonderful feedback on where the students are not doing well when they take a TABE test. So let's look at this example. This is an actual score report for one of our participants, and she tested in reading, but performed at non-proficiency level for identifying and understanding key ideas and details. So then the next column, it shows us the list of demonstrated skills. Those are the ones she already knows. And then the next one says areas for next focus. These are the ones that she doesn't know. Bingo. So these are the ones we're going to focus on. So she was one of our participants that was only 5 points away from making it to the next NRS level. We would want to hone in on these areas for next focus over the next 40 hours or 70 hours, whatever your assessment guidance is for post-test hours. Hone in on these areas for next focus, and then they will be ready to get these right on their next test, on their next post-test. So let's go back to the bigger picture for a second. And once we realize that this is a step-by-step process from receiving an MSG report to analyzing the MSG report, testing the students, looking at their score reports, going back through the scale score guidance, seeing exactly where they're at, checking their EFLs, and then pulling up this test report that they get from TABE and going over it with them, going over it with your supervisor, going over it as far as your classroom instruction is concerned. All of these steps are really important in being able to help your students succeed. And if we never use any of these reports, then we are never going to really be able to help our students become the most successful that they can be in a classroom. I want to give you some examples of things that you can do to help with your participants, things that are not necessarily just in your classroom. I want you to use all available resources that you have for your participants. And each program may be different, but you can jot these down real quick. So one of them, and I'm trying to give examples that we all might have available to us, okay? So a breakout room to give more individualized instruction for your participants. If you have a class that has a variety of educational functioning levels, then it's likely there are participants who are on the high end of the spectrum and some that are on the low end of the spectrum. And the highest are probably going to need more of a challenge, and the lowest are going to need more reinforcement. So using a breakout room for a very short period of time will really help you target instruction to what their needs are. and it will help them succeed better. And even if they're high or low, it doesn't matter. We have the same end goal to get them to that next step. One of my biggest challenges that I had when I was in college was in my senior year. I was in Latin, which is hard enough as it is, and I had to teach an entire lesson to lower level students. I learned more than I taught that day. And sometimes we gain the best knowledge when we are preparing to teach other people. Now, I'm not saying that you have to do exactly that, but you can have students take a lead in the instruction, especially the ones that are higher level NRS. Okay, you can have them choose a math problem and teach the class how to go through that problem. Or you could have them read a selection and develop their own questions and answers for the class. But if you do this type of instruction, you need to understand that this type of scenario requires that you have a safe classroom environment in which all students are comfortable and at ease before you can do this. You wouldn't want the student to be put under undue pressure. Another idea is to assign extra work and distance learning platforms for the areas that participants need to focus on. At Region 2, we also have DL instructors who are also assigned specific classes, just like our test proctors are. And the teacher can coordinate with those DL instructors and have them assign in the distance learning platforms additional assignments, maybe in areas that they need extra focus in, or in those areas like our participant had that were non-proficient. Giving them these extra outside of the classroom options for targeting that instruction, increasing their proficiency in areas that they may not be so great at, really helps the students succeed. In closing, I wanted to share one of my favorite mottos, and I know everyone at work has heard me say this multiple times, but it's true. Success is never accidental, and a program must intentionally function as a whole, not as separate parts. And using the MSG report as an instructional tool will provide you with the ability to improve the quality of education you are giving your participants. And look, I know I throw around the word gain a lot, and earning a gain means a lot to our program and it means a lot to the state. But we have to remember that those hard-earned gains translate into success and change in our participants' lives. And honestly, that's why we are all here. We are here to improve the lives in our community and to help our students' goals become realities, which end up looking a lot like success.
Thank you very, very much, Felicia. That was really, really great to hear, this implementation at a classroom program level, which, the state really, a lot of times programs reach out to us for some recommendations. And it's really hard because we're not in the field. We're not in the weeds. We aren't working with students day to day. So, it's really helpful to bring someone in like Felicia who can share out. But I wanted to tie everything together. We have a couple of questions at the end, about 4 of them. If you can stay on to participate with that, that's great, but we understand if you can't. But for the next couple of minutes, I just want to tie everything back together, especially for the coordinators, the administrators, and and the instructors on this conversation today. So this is a team effort, as Felicia had mentioned. It's not just the state or the administrators. We also need the instructors to understand MSG's performance outcomes, what needs to be achieved for these grants. So the first thing I wanted to mention is issues that we see, or kind of break down the issues that we see when it comes to MSG performance, meeting MSG performance, and some of the recommendations we can do at the state, but also at the program level. So the first thing that we see happening is performance is not being met. So that's pretty obvious. Recommendation, or solution that we're trying to do at the state level is making sure that the information gets to all levels of the organization that are providing the services and overseeing the services. So that's the first thing that we do. We make sure the information gets out. We're pretty regular in sharing out the information. But at the program level, what can be done? So clearly understanding and also having a process to share out any new information from TWC. So directors, administrators, the best thing you can do for your team, for your staff, is make sure that they clearly understand things, make sure that it's being shared out as soon as it comes out. right? It doesn't just get stuck in an email somewhere. You make sure that everybody gets this information. The next thing I wanted to share is MSGs not being understood. Yes, we've heard of them, but what are they really? So things that we're doing regularly at the state level, again, is providing technical assistance, doing webinars, doing trainings on a consistent basis. But what can the program level be doing? They can explain state measures and have regular communication about MSGs within the organization. So these are regularly part of the meetings. What Felicia shared was the MSG Mondays, where staff knows that we're going to be going over this data and this information. So that is part of the normal conversation. It's nothing new, and that kind of just gets popped up on you. The other issue that we're finding is MSG attainment has not been a team effort. And, it's not really the fault of the team or the staff. It's sometimes these things that I just mentioned earlier, not knowing what MSGs are, not getting the communication. But what can be done to make more of a team effort? At the state level, making TA more inclusive and sharing in a way that is applicable to different stakeholders and staff. So we have the Manager Mondays, we have the Teacher Tuesdays. Usually at the state level, we're sharing out with the director, we're sharing out the administrators, but opportunities like Teacher Tuesdays allow us to break down in the information so that it is applicable for other levels of the staff that have a significant role in the success of the students. At the program level, what can be done? You can create focus groups and teams that focus on the area of performance. You can do cross training. So it's not just one person has the information, multiple people have the information, and they are all contributing to the success together and creating solutions together. The other thing that's really important is staying on track to goal attainment. A lot of times what happens is we have these lofty goals, we come up with a brilliant plan, but it does not get executed and we do not see the results of what we had envisioned. So recommendation at the state level, continuing to provide accountability and reporting through tracking performance and reports, continually having our monthly meetings with grant recipients to go over performance. But when we have these meetings, sometimes there's questions that can't be answered because the only ones who can truly answer that are the people that are doing the work. And I mean, instructors, when was the last time that you were part of our monthly meetings with your directors? Probably never. So, I mean, that just goes to show how well you're being included in the conversation. So recommended solution at program level, make sure that the data is pulled regularly and shared with staff at an instructor level to stay on top of progress towards goals. So first question, what is something you can learn by reviewing the MSG report? So this is, stuff, we've gone through this stuff. A, when a person has exited. B, when a student became a participant. C, whether a participant made a gain after testing. Or D, how many students did not accumulate 12 hours? If you could just put your answer in the chat, we'd appreciate it. And we're just going to try to go through this as quickly as possible. So I'm going to look at the chat. The answer is C, whether a participant made a gain after post-testing. That's on the MSG report. Everything else can be found on the POP report. What MSGs can you find on the MSG report for participants? A, enrollment into post-secondary after exiting. B, HSC completion. C, gain with post-testing. Or D, all of the above. And the answer is all of the above. So 2 more questions. How many MSGs does each participant need? A, at least 1 every program year they are a participant. B, none. C, whatever the program feels like doing. Or D, at least 1 HSC completion, post-test with a gain, and post-secondary enrollment. So this one I'm kind of curious as to what people are going to answer, actually. So the answer is A, at least 1 every program year they are a participant. So every participant must acquire at least 1 education MSG within the program year. An additional workforce training MSG is required for those individuals in the IET, EL civics. So who is responsible for participants making a measurable skills gain? A, the director of the program. B, the instructor. C, the career navigator. Or D, it is everyone's responsibility. So hopefully everyone is answering D, it is everyone's responsibility, and I hope you feel that way after today's presentation. It's a team effort. We need you instructors. We need you to understand these MSGs and looking at those reports regularly, seeing what your students are doing and how can we help them to achieve their dreams, their goals. And that is all I have, unless anyone has any questions that are just burning to be answered.
I haven't seen many questions. Probably people are going to have to think about all of this information, and I bet you get some emails.
Thank you, everybody, again. Thank you, TCall team, Krista, Anne-Marie, and Wade for your support as always. Thank you, Felicia, for joining us. It's such great information. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing in the field, and everybody that's participating also. I know you're all working very, very hard, and you really have your hearts in it when it comes to these students succeeding. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, everyone. And I appreciate the invite to be here. It really means a lot to us. And we just really want to make sure that everybody knows that data and reports can be an active and useful process. So
absolutely. That was fantastic, Felicia. All right. Thank you.